talk about training and development, and leadership training and development in particular, and the difference. So first and foremost, training and development are used together all the time, and that's not helpful, because training is the imparting of new information, which is meant to close a gap, an information gap, so that people can move forward. Development understands that the gap may not exist simply in knowledge. The application of the knowledge, the complexity of the situation, the analysis of the situation, all of that stuff comes into development. So when people talk about leadership, training, development, and coaching as one thing, they're completely ignoring the reality of the role, the reality of the role of each of those. So training closes a knowledge gap. Development does a bit of both, closes the knowledge gap and helps people integrate them. And coaching is more about focusing on bringing out what the leader has in order to hit the results. So supporting them to make more effective decisions with what they already have in terms of knowledge and insight. Really important to know the differences. There are more technical differences, and look, people define it in lots of different ways. I just think keeping it simple is really important. Training's on one end of the spectrum, coaching's on the other end. In between sits development. And often development can lean on the need for training and new knowledge, as well as practices that pull out the knowledge of the person. So for me, development sits in the middle of those things. And it's really important to know the difference, because if you're paying for leadership training, but you need development, you're going to have a problem with the deliverables and the objectives. If you go for training and you think it's going to make you a better leader, but actually being a better leader is about practice and implementation and using the right knowledge at the right time with the right skill sets, you're going to find yourself frustrated. So understanding the difference isn't just me being pedantic, which is possible too. It's not just me being pedantic. It is about understanding the importance of knowing what the objectives are and what the route to meet those objectives needs to be. So frequently what happens for me is that people call me for a training, I have a conversation with them, and then through the conversation I realise that what they need is either development or coaching, or vice versa. People say, look, I need some leadership coaching. We have a conversation and it's really clear that actually they're just missing some knowledge. There's a couple of informal assessments that we do during the free consultations. So that's really important to take into account when we're trying to make the decision between training, development, and coaching. So a couple of ways that you can do it. Training fills the knowledge gap. So if you or the leaders you're working with simply don't know how to present, public speak, any of those technical skills for leadership, use the software, input information somewhere, deliver a report, that's all technical. So that's fine. You're doing good. You're on the ball. If the need is that a leader has a lot of knowledge, knows how the place works, knows how the things work, but isn't having the impact relationally or strategically, then coaching might be a really good fit, because then they can work through where the barriers to the impact is actually occurring and what they can do to help themselves. Development is in the middle, and development is usually really helpful for organizations or for groups of leaders where there is a shared knowledge that's required, and application of that knowledge across a leadership team is helpful, because it creates alignment, it helps people understand each other, it brings more awareness to the team. Now within that development, you might also place some coaching, some individual work to help individual leaders also look at their leader development, so how they are developing as an individual leader as well. So when we think about leadership development, when we think about leadership training, what we really need to be doing is don't worry about the words we're using, but define the objective and what a great outcome looks like, what a really good return on investment looks like, and then work back from there about the appropriate intervention. We usually default to training simply because it's easier to define and measure, as in you can measure that people have done the training. Impact isn't so easy to measure. And also because sometimes it would be easier if we deny the complexity. So when somebody comes to me and says, Sheila, can you do leadership training? And I say, well, actually, it's not training you need, it's development, because A, B, and C are barriers to the progress of any of the leaders or leadership team. That can be frustrating, because they want it to be simpler because they have a KPI or a deliverable, because they want the answer to be simple. And that's okay. It's okay to want the answer to be simple. But wanting the answer to be simple and therefore implementing a simple solution that isn't appropriate for the real need is a waste of money. It's a waste of time. Your team, the participants get frustrated with it. You get a lot of pushback. There isn't implementation. We can't measure return on investment. The knowledge doesn't translate to impact for your people or your employees. And so it doesn't work that way. So what I would say is, if you want to decide what intervention you need to contract someone up front to help define that with you. Whether you contract the person who's going to implement the development, or you bring someone in. And the reason that we look for external, and the reason that external work is really valuable, is that when you utilize an external process, an external person, they can see the organization because they aren't part of it, and they can make recommendations that often internal functions can't make for different political reasons, for different positions. When you're in a different position of the organization, you see things differently. Maybe it's not related to their KPI, maybe it's not related to their remit. And so sometimes when we work simply internally, we're not really getting an objective view that can really name what needs to be done or is needed in the organisation. And this isn't because anyone isn't doing their job. Quite the contrary. It's because sometimes we're so focused on the actual job in front of us, it's really hard to step back and look at the organisational performance. And remember, leader development and leadership development is always about bringing the organisation forward and helping with performance. So it's not simply about whether they are equipped or not. It's about whether the way that we've equipped them actually results in organisational performance or improvement. It's whether leaders are equipped and supported to have the impact that they want to have, that the organisation wants to have. Like, the reality is that most people say, when they think their leaders are bad, because knowledge doesn't lead to change. Like, despite what people say, the evidence is there. I know what I should eat. Does that mean that I do eat it? Because the knowledge isn't enough. We need to create an environment in which that knowledge can be used, but we also need to have the skills to apply that knowledge, and we need to have the critical thinking and assessments to know when to apply that knowledge appropriately. We need to do the same with leadership. We need to think about what is really needed here. How do we do this in the most efficient and effective way possible that can create sustainable results? Because quick fixes, ticking a box and saying someone attended training or has knowledge, doesn't mean helped people improve things. It just means you've added something to their card. And often leaders feel overwhelmed and upset that they're not having the impact that they want when they've been given all the knowledge that they think they need. But the knowledge isn't the issue. It's usually in the middle of the development. It's the application of the knowledge, the ability to assess its appropriateness, the ability to see the nuances, to see some of the invisible forces at play, to assess the needs of people more effectively, to understand what they're avoiding. And that's what we need to think about when we're thinking about leadership development or training or coaching, is what is needed. And that's why my free consultations with individuals is always that assessment. And that's also why when I work with organizations, when they send me the objectives, I come back to them with the best solution to that. So what I want to know from you is, what do you think the gap is for you? Is it a knowledge gap? Is it a practice gap? Is it kind of the assessment of when to apply it? Or is there a systemic challenge getting in the way of the application of your leadership? And then you can start to think, what can I do differently and what support do I need? Because leadership cannot be done alone.